We're going to continue through the book of Job this morning. I really hope to finish it up today because next week there will be no Sunday school. We're having the Christmas cantata Sunday, and so that starts at 10:30, I believe, in the morning, and I think there's a banquet to follow. So bring your dish of choice, I guess, and show up at 10:30 next week, and there'll be a good Christmas time next week with the choir, and that'll be great. But there'll be no Sunday school next week, which means it'll be 2 weeks until we have class here again. So I'd like to finish up Job, and chapter 38 is where we're going to begin today. Chapter 38. Last week we covered a speech by a man named Elihu. Elihu, there's a variety of opinions on whether he's a good character or a bad character, and whether what he said is good or not. But we went through each of his 6 chapters last week, and we kind of summarized what he said, and we came up with these 3 things. With each of the other characters we talked about, we asked, is the character right? When Zophar speaks, is Zophar right? Or when Eliphaz speaks, is Eliphaz right? Let's ask the same things about Elihu. Here's what Elihu said, just to summarize the 6-chapter-long soliloquy that he gave. His 6 chapters basically are this. He said, first of all, don't condemn Job without a reason. He looks at the 3 friends. He says, 3 friends, you've been accusing Job of wrongdoing this whole time, but you have no idea what he did. Don't go around accusing him if you don't know what you're accusing him for. You can't just blatantly assume that he's done something wrong. Then he turns to Job and he says, God doesn't always answer to man, first of all. Job has been saying, God needs to defend himself to me because he's done me wrong and he's violated my rights and I'm innocent and he's not doing his job. And so God needs to come and explain himself to me. And Elihu says, God doesn't need to answer to mankind for what he does. He's God. Third of all, he says, God doesn't do wrong or unjustly. Job has accused God throughout his speeches of God being unjust because he lets the unrighteous go unpunished, and now he's punishing me who is righteous, and he's not doing his job in maintaining law and order and being righteous, and he's not doing his job. And Elihu comes through and says, God doesn't do wrong, and he doesn't do things that are unjust. You have to trust what he does. Fourth of all, he said, God hears you. Wait for him. Job has accused God, again, throughout the book, of saying God is not paying attention. Clearly, he doesn't know what's going on here. We need to wake God up. We need to make sure he's not being derelict in his duties, and he's not being negligent of his earth and creation and what we're doing, because clearly he's making a mistake. And Elihu comes through and says, God does hear you. You just have to wait for him. He knows what's going on. He's fully aware. Trust me. But you have to wait for his timing. Fifth, he says, don't abandon God because of this trial. Elihu says, look, from the things that you've been saying, you're coming dangerously close to saying that you don't want to follow God anymore. And don't abandon your worship of God because of what you're going through. It is not worth it. Stick with him. Be faithful to him. And finally, he finishes by saying, God is in control of everything. He's got it all under control. He is sovereign. It's okay. So I ask you again, is Elihu right in what he says? If we were to take a vote, would it be a good vote or a bad vote? What do you think? Good or bad? Now, I have to confess something to you. I've been a little bit tricky with you here. Last week, after the Job and 3 friends conversations, we said, all right, let's go through and let's analyze the conversations that have been going on in the past several chapters of the book. And I asked several questions, and I gave several answers, and at least, I know we're in the auditorium, people don't respond, but at least people seem to generally agree with the analysis that we gave of the conversation. Well, I cheated a little bit. On those 6 questions I asked before we read through Elihu were the 6 questions that Elihu himself asked and responded to there, and he came up on the screen with the same answers that we came up with before we read through Elihu. Personally, I think Elihu said everything right, and I know we said that about all the characters through, but Elihu's kind of on like the second story view as opposed to the ground level view that we went through with Job and his 3 friends. Personally, I think Elihu was a good guy who said the right things, and I think he kind of answered the questions in a way that I would have answered Job and the 3 friends if they had asked me the questions. And so he went through and he addresses really these 6 points. I mean, obviously he said a lot more than just that. But is Elihu right? Yes, I think he was. And he, like I said, he answered the way that I would have answered him if I had been asked the questions. Which brings us to chapter 38. Chapter 38, we turn a whole corner and we have the last main speaker of the book begin to speak as well, don't we? And that speaker in this case is God himself. So So God himself steps in, and he has a speech to deliver. Now, throughout the book, Job has been wanting to confront God about his situation. And Job's three friends also wish that God would reprimand Job. Both sides were wishing God would step in and set things straight. Chapter 13, verse 3, Job says, "Oh, but I would speak to the Almighty, and I desired to argue my case before God. I wish I could stand before God and present my case to him, and God would recognize that he's made a mistake and that I'm innocent and that all this punishment was for nothing and it's been one big misunderstanding. And I just wish that I could speak to God face to face and I'd set him right." Remember, when I stand before him, I'm going to come out like gold. I'm going to be looking like gold when I get done speaking to God, because he's going to recognize and acknowledge that I'm right. Well, the three friends also wished that God would come and speak. In chapter 11, Zophar says, "But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you. I wish God would just come down and tell you that you've been wrong and you need to repent and you need to get right with him." So both sides are wishing that God would step in and speak. And amazingly, in this situation, they both get their request granted, don't they? God does come down and he does speak. And while he does speak, it doesn't turn out quite the way that they had been envisioning, though. Both sides were hoping that God would be on their side. In reality, neither side gets exactly what they wanted. Job, throughout the book, has been wishing for a scene kind of like this. He keeps using courtroom trial language and analogies, doesn't he? And in Job's mind, Job is going to be like the defense attorney standing up there pleading his case, and God is going to be the defendant the defendant who is on trial. And Job is almost like the prosecutor. I said defendant, sorry. He's almost like the prosecutor saying, my client has been wrongfully accused, and this guy has been punishing him unjustly. And Job is going to be kind of in the driver's seat, and God will be on the defensive. That's kind of what seems to be going on in Job's mind based on what he said. But when God steps in and actually does start to speak, what happens? Doesn't quite turn out that way, does it? It's a little bit more like this, where God is in the driver's seat. And Job suddenly and unexpectedly, and to his own chagrin, finds himself very much on the defensive, doesn't it? So in chapter 38, we see God start to speak. God's first round of questions to Job really emphasizes God's unlimited knowledge, his wisdom, and his power, contrasted with Job's very limited understanding. Take a look at chapter 38. And God steps in here, chapter 38, verse 1. "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said," and guys, if you were in here, I remember we went through the book this past summer, and I believe the book this past summer kind of went into length describing how whirlwinds stand for gentleness and grace and kindness and mercy. And with all due respect, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with that a little bit. I've talked to people who saw the twin tornadoes of Palm Sunday in 1965, and I heard their descriptions of that. I also talked to several people who saw the Napanee tornado in 2007 go through. And of all the people I've spoken to that have viewed tornadoes, gentleness, mercy, and grace are not really descriptors they used in terms of describing tornadoes. How do people describe tornadoes? Come on, how do they describe tornadoes? Yeah, they're devastating. They're a massive amounts of power, but they're kind of out of control, causing random devastation wherever they go. That's what a tornado does. And so when God speaks out of a whirlwind, I really think that's more of the picture that he's almost presenting. And I know the book this summer used a couple Bible passages, which I won't go into right now. And as I look at them, I think, I'm not so sure he used those right. But anyway, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with the book. I don't think he is trying to portray grace and gentleness by coming through a tornado, speaking from a tornado. I think he's kind of portraying the very picture that Job has seen as God throughout the book. Throughout the book, God has kind of envisioned God with the same qualities as the tornado, hasn't he? God is he's a massive amount of power and force, but he doesn't listen to me. He's just causing devastation in my life. He's ruining my life for no particular reason. It's like random, it's like a loose cannon, here and there and everywhere, and just breaking everything in its path. That seems to be how God is in my life here throughout this book. And so it's almost like as if God is saying, this is how you see me, isn't it, Job? As a devastating power wreaking havoc in people's lives for no particular reason, like a tornado would. And so he comes to Job in the form of a tornado, and he speaks to him from this whirlwind. Verse 2, and he says, and these are God's first words to Job, Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? If God ever speaks to me, which I don't expect him to in this life, but if he would, that's probably not how I want the conversation to start. Who is this who comes to me with grandiose words but has no idea what they're talking about? Verse 3, dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. I have some questions for you, Job, and you're going to answer to me, the Almighty, who is speaking to you from this whirlwind, which is how you see me anyways. Are you ready? Brace yourself. Here we go. Ding! Round one, and they step into the boxing ring. Job versus God, who will win? Verse 4, God starts asking Job questions. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me something if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. And again, I have to hear a little bit of sarcasm coming through here. You know, don't you, Job? You've got all these grandiose ideas. You know how I should be running the universe. You know the difference between right and wrong. You have it all figured out. Why don't you answer some of these questions for me, Job? Who stretched out the line upon it? Verse 6. On what were its bases sunk, or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted together for joy? Where were you when the universe was created, Job? How did you put it all together? How did you design the planets and the stars and everything to work together? Tell me, Job, you were there, weren't you? And of course, it's an unanswered question, but if we were to answer the question, the answer is, well, no, I wasn't there. Can we move on to the next question, please? Okay, God says, next question, verse 6. Who shut the sea in with doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band? Who designed the earth to run the way that it did? And who devised the land and the sea and tells the sea to stop where it does so that it doesn't overrun the land, kind of like it did back in Noah's day? Who set all this up, Job? I did. Verse 12. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place? Are you the one that tells the sun to come up and go down? Are you the one that tells it when to go north or south for the different seasons? Are you the one that designs all the seasons and the meteorology and all that kind of stuff, Job? Can you handle that? Because I can handle that, Job. I know how it all works because I made it. I was there on day one. I put it together. I made it all. Verse 16, have you entered into the springs of the sea, or have you walked in the recesses of the deep? Do you know what happens in the deep trenches of the ocean, Job? Can you identify everything that's going on down there? Can you control it? Do you know what's going on in the depths of the sea and the sharks and the fish and all the different things? Verse 18, have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare it if you know all this. Tell me about it, Job, if you know, because I know all these things because I put them together. Verse 19, where's the way to the dwelling of light? And where's the place of darkness, that you may take to its territory, and that you may discern the path to its home? You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. Was Job actually born then? He was not. Why does God say this? Why does God say, oh, you were born then, weren't you? Why? Come on. Why does he say, you know why? If you said that to somebody else, you know exactly why. Again, he's kind of insulting Job, kind of, and I don't think he's doing it just to be mean or just to be bully. I'm not saying that. But he's forcing Job to think, wait a minute, what exactly is my place here versus what is God's place in the universe? And he's kind of forcing Job to think through the separation between himself and God, and which is really greater, who deserves to be in control here. Verse 22, have you entered the storehouses of snow, or have you seen the storehouses of hail? Do you design and command and do you know how all the weather and meteorology works? Can you tell the rain to come down, or the snow when it comes down? Where's that come from, Job? Or the lightning, where's that come from? You know, don't you? Verse 25, who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt? Can you tell the lightning when to strike, Job, and then the thunder to come afterwards? Verse 28, does the rain have a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew? When it dews in the morning. How does that happen, Job? Can you explain it? I put it all together. Don't you know? Verse 31, can you bind the chains of Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Are you the ones that drag the constellations across the sky as they move across the sky, Job? Can you command them? Can you take control of them? Can you tell them to move this way instead of that way? Because I told them to go that way. But if you want to overrule me, Job, you go right ahead, because that's kind of what you want to do, right? You want to tell me how to run things. You want to tell me when I'm wrong. So go ahead. Tell me I'm wrong. You move the constellations where you want them, Job. Have at it. Go for it. Let me see it. Do you see what he's doing? Verse 34, can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you tell the clouds what to do? Verse 30, can you hunt down the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? Can you take care of the wildlife? Do you know how all that works? All the ecosystem and the food chain and all that kind of stuff. Chapter 39, verse 1, do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of does? How do things reproduce, and how do they survive, and who feeds them? Who takes care of all the wildlife and everything that goes on in the natural world? Verse 9, is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you subdue these large things? Verse 19, do you give the horse its might? Do you clothe its neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? Do you design all the different animals to be able to do what it is that they can do? Did you design the kangaroos to bounce and the horses to run and the bears to say growl and be big and strong, all that kind of stuff? Do you design all that, Job? Excuse me. And he goes on to ask more questions about the natural world. Verse 26, is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spreads his wings towards the south? How do birds fly, Job? Explain it to me. You know all these things, don't you? You're so smart. You're down here spouting off your mouth words without knowledge. Why don't you explain something useful and tell us how these things work? How does it fit together? And he continues on like that through the end of chapter 39. The Lord, finally in chapter 40, says to Job, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? After I've shown you all these things, Job, you haven't been able to answer a single one of my questions. And yet throughout the rest of the book, you've been saying that you know what's best and you know what's right and that I'm wrong, that I don't know what I'm doing. So if you're so smart, Job, why don't you tell me all of these things? Will you, the fault finder, contend with the Almighty? Are you sure you're really qualified to question what I'm doing, Job? He who argues with God, let him answer it. And it's time for Job to answer. If we were to summarize, we'd say God's instruction, his questions say this: I am all-knowing and I am all-powerful, and you, Mr. Job, are not. You kind of thought you were throughout the book, didn't you? You knew what was going on, but really, I am the all-powerful God. And Job answers here in verse 3 through 5 of chapter 40, and he says this: Then Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer, twice, but I will proceed no further. What do we think of that answer? Is that a good answer or a not so good answer? Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once and will not answer twice, but I will proceed no further. What do you think? Good answer, bad answer? Thumbs up? Good answer. Thumbs down? Who says thumbs down? I see one. Oh, I see two. Okay, good. We got some disagreement. I love disagreement. Seriously, I kind of do, because this is when it gets fun, and this is when I really wish I was in a different classroom where we could dialogue a little better. But it is what it is. Here's how I see this answer, and I'll tell you why. If you've had kids, have you ever had a kid, or maybe a coworker, maybe a spouse, hopefully not, who you're having a discussion, and there's a disagreement here, and there's maybe a bit of a heated argument, and you win the argument, and they fold their arms and say, fine, you're the boss, you do whatever you want anyway, so I'm just going to sit here and be quiet. Have you ever heard a little kid do anything like that, and then they get a paddle to the backside and things improve a little bit? To me, it sounds a little bit like that's what Job is saying here. Fine, you're the big, powerful God, and you just came down and you're just going to do whatever you want anyway. So I'm just a little guy. How can I answer, So I'm going to put my hand on my mouth. You've spoken, and I won't answer. Twice, and I'm just, fine, I'll just stop. Is God going to be satisfied with that answer? Does that really communicate what God is trying to get across? Now, God just explained his vast and omnipotent power and his sovereignty and all that kind of thing. But is that really what God is looking for? Just an outward, fine, you're the boss, you win. But I'm still kind of angry. I don't think it is. So far, we've seen Job versus God, haven't we? And in the first 2 chapters, this first round of God's questioning, what has God really done? What has he focused on? He said, this isn't really quite the situation here, Job versus God, where we're on equal footing, is it? What God has said, look, this is a little bit more like it, where you're the Job, but I am the God. I'm the God of the universe. But really, isn't that kind of what Job has been saying throughout much of the book? I mean, several times by his own words, Job has said, God is so big and so powerful, he won't even listen to me when I have a complaint. I wish there was somebody over God who could set us both straight. So God comes down, he says, hey, I'm the all-powerful boss here. Who are you? In a sense, it almost sounds to me like God has just confirmed in Job's mind what he suspected all along. God's just this big CEO in the sky who doesn't have time for the little guy, and if only I could unionize with a bunch of people and get together, maybe we could strike, but we don't have enough people to do that, and so I just got to sit here and be quiet and get pushed around by the bully. And so God goes in for a second round, doesn't he? And in the second round, he focuses on not the right-hand part of the equation, but he looks more at the left-hand part of the equation, doesn't he? Instead of this, God changes the formula more to this, doesn't he? He says, all right, now I think you've got a picture of who I am. Let's turn and look at the other half of this equation. Let's try to figure out who you are. Because throughout this book, Job has already had a pretty solid grasp of God's all-powerfulness and his omnipotence and his sovereignty. The problem hasn't been that Job's view of God is too small. I think the real problem throughout the book is that Job's view of Job is what? A little bit maybe too big. And so, once again, the bell rings, and they both step back into the boxing ring, and it's time for round 2. God's second round of questions to Job emphasizes Job's smallness and insignificance, contrasted with God's bigness and all-importance. So in chapter 40, verse 6, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, dress for action like a man, I will question you, and you will make it known to me. That's what he said in the first round. But now he adds a little bit more, doesn't he? The next verse, will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? Job, are you going to try to condemn me to justify yourself? You're going to try to tell me, the all-sovereign, that I am in the wrong? Will you justify yourself? Verse 9, have you an arm like God, and can you thunder with a voice like his? If you're going to speak and tell me that I'm wrong, and you're going to set yourself over me as my judge, you better be able to back up what you can say, Job. So let's have a round of questions for you, and let's see how you do this time around. You didn't quite get the idea. You missed the point the first time, so let's have another go at it, shall we? Verse 10, adore yourself, Job, with majesty and dignity. Go ahead, Job, clothe yourself with glory and splendor. Pour out the overflowings of your anger, Job, and look on everyone who is proud and abase him. You're so big and strong, Job. Why don't you look around at all the injustice on the earth and you set it right? You bring down the proud, Job. Why don't you lift up the humble? Why don't you set things right the way that you want them to be, Job? Go ahead. Go. Let's see it. And Job sits there and does what? No. Verse 11. Pour out the overflowings of your anger. Look on everyone who is proud, abase him. Verse 12. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low. Tread down the wicked where they stand. Bring justice on the earth, Job. Verse 13. Hide them all in the dust together. Bind their faces in the world below. Then I will also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can save you. When you can implement justice the way you want it, Job, then I'll listen to what you have to say. But you can't. You're just a little guy. And you don't have any power. You don't really have any idea what's going on. You cannot set things straight, Job. You can't. And again, I don't think he's saying all these things just to be a bully, but God's being pretty direct here in the way that he's addressing Job. He's saying, Job, you've really overstepped your bounds here, I think. You're trying to play God by telling me, the real God, that I'm wrong. That is not your place at all. You're just a little guy, and you don't have the power to do any of these things that you're saying. At this point, he turns his attention to one of 2 creatures that are brought up in these next couple chapters. People always get hung up on the identity of the creatures, and while that's a fascinating discussion, that's not really the point of the book, and I don't want to get into it. I am convinced that they are real creatures. He says in verse 15, behold, behemoth, which I made as I made you. So unless Job is also a fictional pretend character, I think these other things are also real creatures. Whatever they are, personally I tend to think they were things that aren't living today. Maybe dinosaurs are the popular opinion. I'd probably go that way. But really the identity isn't the main issue here. All we need to know is that these are huge creatures, which Job was familiar with, that were known for their size, their strength, and their invincibility. Whatever their name tag says, frankly, I don't care at this point, because that's just a diversion from what the book is actually talking about. But he looks at this behemoth, and whatever this behemoth actually looked like, whatever it actually was, everybody knew it was strong, it was powerful, and he didn't mess with it. And that's all we need to know. Verse 15, he says, "Behold, behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins. His power is in the muscles of his belly." And he goes on to define and describe all the characteristics of this massive, huge beast that Job clearly is afraid of and he cannot tame. Verse 19 says, "He is the first of the works of God." Doesn't mean like first chronologically in order. It means first like he's the apex predator. Nobody messes with this guy. He's on top of the food chain, and everybody just kind of runs away from this guy. Nobody gets in his way. He's the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. The only one that can do battle with this guy is who? His maker, the one who made him. Who does that happen to be? Oh, it happens to be God. But what about Job? He's a big tough guy, isn't he? He knows what's going on. He can rule the world. He knows all the answers. Why doesn't Job take care of him? Why doesn't Job take care of him? Because he's not as big as he thinks he is. He continues on to describe Behemoth through chapter 40. And then in chapter 41, he turns to another creature. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? Again, I don't care who Leviathan is, but look how God focuses his questions here. It's not, there are descriptions of Leviathan and all that kind of stuff too, but how does he really direct his questions toward Job here, especially in the first part of the book? Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Will he beg? Or will he speak to you with soft words? Can you go out and hunt this guy? Can you tame him? Can you capture him? Can you subdue him? Can you domesticate him? Will he make a covenant with you to take him for your servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you put him on a leash for your little girls? Will traders bargain over him? If it is you versus Leviathan, who's going to win? Who's going to win, Job? He will. He will. Verse 8, lay your hands on him and remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, the hope of a man is false. He is laid low at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to stir him up. Who then is he who can stand before me? Here's the point of the questions. If you can't even take on little old Leviathan there, who to me is nothing more than a squeaky toy in my bathtub, because I created him. I plunked him down there in the oceans of earth. I can do with him whatever I want. I can raise him up. I can destroy him. I can lead him around, says God. Why don't you go do the same if you're so big and tough and can tell me what to do? If you're afraid to approach and have a disagreement with little old Leviathan over there, what in the world makes you think that you have the right to come and approach and disagree and take on me, the sovereign of the universe? Can you see what God's doing here is making Job feel littler and littler and littler with every question. And for us, if one of us does that to another person, we'd probably call it intimidation and bullying, wouldn't it? Because no one person really should be doing that to another person. And especially we as Americans are ingrained, equal rights and all created equal and that kind of thing. But that doesn't play out so well when we're talking about God, does it? Because he is not our equal. And all God is doing is putting Job in the place where he really should have been all along. Verse 11, God says, who has first given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine, including Leviathan, including Behemoth, and including you, Job. He goes on to describe Leviathan. We're not going to read all the descriptions, but he's huge, he's massive, he's invincible. Verse 33, on earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. He sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. And God gets done with his questions. And at this point, hopefully Job is feeling probably very small, isn't he? He said, boy, I really wanted to have a conversation with God, but this did not quite turn out the way that I was expecting it to go. For all the other speakers throughout the book, we've asked the question, is the speaker right? So let's kind of ask the same question, kind of. Now, easy answer, right? Because we automatically know that obviously God's going to be right. But let's look at the discussion a little bit here and ask some more questions. Let's analyze a little bit. Was Job wronged by God by allowing him to suffer? Did God do Job wrong by giving him a trial? Now, keep in mind everything that God has just said. First, we start off at Job's ground level view. Then we went to Elihu's second story view. Now we skyrocket up into the atmosphere, and we're going to look at things from God's point of view now that we have his perspective. So given everything that God has just explained and everything that Job was supposed to have learned, let's answer these questions. Was Job wronged by God by allowing him to suffer without cause? Did God wrong Job for all of his suffering? Let me ask the same question in a slightly different way. Job's 10 children lost their lives for no fault of their own and for no other reason than that God had a little wager going on with Satan. Was God wrong for doing that? He killed them. God killed 10 adult kids just so he could prove a point to Satan. Was he wrong for doing that? How about this one? Unknown numbers of Job's servants who were guarding the sheep and the cattle and the oxen lost their lives when the invading bands or forces or whatever came in and stole all the livestock and killed all the servants. All those servants lost their lives. All those kids lost a dad. All the wives lost a husband. All the parents lost their children. Death and carnage all over just for the purpose of God proving a point to Satan. Does that make anybody a little uncomfortable? Does God have a right to do that, to destroy people's lives whenever and however he wants to do it? Was Job wronged by God by allowing him to suffer without cause? What's the answer? Because this is the kind of thing that gets a lot of people today, unbelievable. I've heard people say, I could never follow a God that allows, and then they name some tragedy in the world. I could never worship a God that allows this to happen. That's kind of the same question we're asking here in Job, isn't it? Was God wrong for putting Job through this? What's the answer?
God is sovereign.
Yeah, he said, God is sovereign, if you didn't hear. And that's the correct answer, by the way. That's absolutely true. But if we don't have an accurate view of who God is, that's a very uncomfortable answer to give, isn't it? I mean, it's a simple answer, but to wrap your mind around the implications of what that means, if we're not in total submission to God, that's a very, very, very uneasy answer to give. But it's correct. No, God did not wrong Job. God has the right to do whatever he pleases at any time, period. Does that include when we think it doesn't look right? Does that include when we think that innocent people have been harmed? Does that include when it goes against our sense of what should be right and wrong? Does it include even those times? Or are those exceptions where we get to say, oh God, I don't think you did that right. I think you messed up here. A lot of people lost their lives in this whole situation. And Job didn't even lose his life. His life blew up in a number of ways, but at least he lived through it. Other people didn't even live through it. But God can do whatever he wants. He is the sovereign God. And whether we like it or not, he has a right to do whatever he wants whenever he wants, whether we like it or not. How about this question along the same lines? Did God violate Job's rights during his trial? As I alluded to before, we live in America, and that's a wonderful thing. And in many ways it serves us very well, but in here it doesn't, because we are ingrained with rights. I have my rights. I have my rights in work. I have my rights with the police. I have my rights with the government. I have my rights in society. I have my rights, and I will demand my rights. So did God violate Job's rights by everything he had done to him throughout this trial? What do you think? No. Why? Because what? People have no rights before God. God is not bound by the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. God is bound by nothing. He is God. He can do whatever he wants. You have no rights before God. You have no complaint. If God decides to destroy you, he's God, I guess, right? What are you going to say? Does that make God a mean bully? No, but it means that he has the right to do whatever he wants. Bullies are bullies because they infringe on other people's rights in a way they don't have, in a way they shouldn't, right? That doesn't apply to God because there is nothing that he doesn't have, that God does not have a right to. Everything is within his domain. He can do whatever he wants. How about this? Was it fair of God to put Job through this trial? Was it fair? We kind of addressed this last week, didn't we? You know where I'm headed with this already. Yes, you do. I won't spend time on it. Was it fair? Answer, no, it was not fair. Fairness says that everyone deserves to be treated the same way. God is not obligated to treat everyone the same, and he's not wrong to do as he pleases, simply because he is God. Was it fair to all the wives of the servants who lost a husband and were, maybe impoverished for the rest of their life or whatever because they lost a husband, because God decided to do this? Is that fair? No. But does that mean that God did something wrong? No. Why? Because God's not obligated to treat everybody the way that we would like to see them treated. Again, does that make you uneasy? Maybe. Does it make me a little uneasy? Kind of, just because we're so ingrained with a... We'll get to that later. We'll get to that later, I promise. We will. But that doesn't set well with some people because we have an image of God that maybe is less than complete. How about this? Is God obligated to do anything for mankind? Is God obligated to man to do anything for man at any time? Careful, this is a trick question. Think it through. I'm telling you this is a trick. Is God obligated to do anything for mankind? What's the answer? The answer is yes, he is. He is obligated, but only because he has bound himself by oath and by his character to do it. He has made certain promises to mankind. He says, I will do this. Based on my character, I give you my word. Based on who I am, I will perform this thing. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and all who come to me, I will what? I will in no wise cast out. I give you this promise based on who I am, based on my own character, based on my own power. I bound myself to you to perform this thing for you. Is he obligated to us to do it? Yes. Why? Because you're special and he needs you? No. Simply because of who he is. Yeah. So the trick question wasn't, you thought I was going to say no. But yes, he is. But it has nothing to do with us. It's not because of because we deserve it. It's because of his own character and his own power that he obligates himself to do things for us. One last question. Oh boy, we're going to have to drag this into yet another week. Sorry guys, I was really going to try to get through this. All right, one more question. Why, and for the last time in the book, we're going to set aside chapters 1 and 2. Without knowing chapters 1 and 2, what is the answer? Why did God bring this trial on Job? Now again, we can look at the first couple chapters and say, well, it's, because of this thing going on between God and Satan, and God is proving a point, and he's putting Job on exhibit and all this kind of thing. But Job didn't know that, and in our trials and in our lives, we don't have chapters 1 and 2 either. We don't know why. So if we ask the same question of difficulties in our lives or other people's lives, where we don't have insights to the heavenly realms and all that kind of thing, why did God bring this trial on Job? And if you were sitting there in the ash pile with Job and the three friends, and Job is asking why and giving his own answer, and the friends are asking why and they're giving their own answer, and you show up on the scene, what is your answer? Knowing the rest of the book and now having God's divine eye view from the top down, what is the real answer? Job gave his answer, and we know it was not quite right. The friends gave their answer, we know that was not quite right. What is the answer? Why did God bring this trial on Job? This is a tricky one. What's the answer? And in our lives, when somebody comes and says, why is God doing this? And it's not always the best answer to give in a blunt fashion in a counseling setting, but ultimately, theologically, what is the real answer? why does God do this? Why does God do what he does? Answer? The answer is that it's an irrelevant question. The entire question is irrelevant. God answers to no one. Now, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar should have stopped pretending to know God's motives, and Job should have stopped accusing God of being unjust. The problem is that both views assume that man can understand and or judge God's behavior. The real answer is, why does God do what he does? And the real answer kind of throughout the book is, in a sense, none of your business. God doesn't tell you. If God wanted you to know why he does what he does every time, you know what he would do? He would tell you. But he does not. And he doesn't tell me either. And so, while there's nothing wrong with wondering why, I mean, everybody wonders why, and I don't think that's a problem. But in terms of our response and how we behave and what we do within the problem or the trial or the situation, really the why is kind of an irrelevant question, isn't it? Because either way, our response is to be the same. And that response is what? I'll be faithful to God. I'll do what he says. I'll live the best I can according to how he wants me to live. And however it comes out is how it comes out, but I know that he's the one in control. And so why is a valid question, and it's not wrong for us to wonder why. We also have to be okay with maybe not getting that answer. And we can guess and we can speculate, and after the fact we can say, oh, well, look, I see why this happened because now so-and-so or such and such happened as a result. And maybe you're right, but maybe you're not. Maybe so-and-so also happened, but that wasn't God's primary reason. Maybe God has multiple reasons, and it's not just one primary reason. Maybe his reason has nothing to do with you. Maybe it has everything to do with something else. Maybe something happens to you so that something didn't happen to somebody else. We have no idea, and we could go on and on and on and on with maybes and possibilities and speculations. But the point is we have no idea why. Why, ultimately, is an irrelevant question, because we don't get it answered. We certainly don't get it answered here on earth. And I know everybody says we'll go to heaven and God will give us all the answers someday. But again, honestly, I don't see where that's in Scripture. And if you do and you know something I don't, please let me know after class. But I don't know where it says that God will answer any of our questions when we get to heaven. Maybe he'll explain things to us. Or maybe he'll just say, you know what, even now, I'm God. You let me do my own business. You just run around and have fun. But let me do my job. And we will say what? Okay. I submit. You are correct. We did not get near as far as I really hoped we would today. We'll just have to continue this after the cantata. I'm sorry. So everything we said today, you need to super duper lock it into your brains, because we completely build on this in the next class, and is very, very important, because if you lose this perspective today, nothing else will make sense to you. But go ahead and read through the last chapter. Think about the implications of what we said, because I think this is the foundational point of Job right here. It's this transformative mindset that takes you from a place of saying, I'm going to serve God because I know he's loving, he's merciful, and he's cuddly, and I've basically got God tamed to do what I expect him to do when I want him to do it in a way that I approve of. And that was Job's problem too, wasn't it? And God came down and said, oh, that's not the way things work here. When you worship me, worship means something different than I know what you're going to do and I can control you. Worship means that I'm in charge and you're happy with whatever I decide. And that's a fundamental mind shift that I think way too many believers don't even have, especially in our society today. But again, we'll get more to that in 2 weeks, won't we? All right, let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Dear God, we thank you this morning for the book of Job. So many layers here for us to decipher. Each layer gets more intense. Each layer gets more accurate according to your point of view, which is really the only point of view that we're primarily concerned with. And here today we saw what your point of view is. And throughout your questions, we noticed that you never even addressed all the conversation between Job and his friends and Elihu. You never even responded to that. We would expect you to come down and respond to what they said and answer their questions and explain yourself. You did none of that. All you did was come down and show us who you were. And I think that's amazing in the way you approach that, because you basically, You subjugated everything that Job and the three friends said to complete irrelevance. Nothing they said even matters in all of their argumentation. And you came along and you showed us the one thing that really didn't matter. That is who you are. And that's really the ultimate answer to everything. I pray that you'd help us all to understand and really take this in and consider the implications of what that means to serve a sovereign God. And help us to apply this to our lives as we live every day. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Next week is the cantata. The following week we will finish up Job, I almost promise. And then we'll move on to the prophets. Thank you, you're dismissed.